But honestly, what?
Well, the recording's in progress now. So I should say, before I say what I was going to say, I'll say that we're reading Jean-Jacques Rousseau, The Social Contract. Yep. We just did book 1. But I was just going to say I'm excited because next week's book came, and I was just thumbing through it. It's perfect, especially because of the horrible assassination that happened.
I don't have any. I just saw a few people post. I have no idea what happened.
Oh yeah, well, the executive of I think United Healthcare, an insurance company, a big insurance company, got assassinated in Manhattan at like 5 a.m.
Whoa!
By
got
somebody
assassinated?
Well, I mean, he got killed, and they haven't found the guy, and he used a silencer, and anybody, who knows what happened.
Crazy.
And apparently, his wife said he was getting death threats, and she sort of said like maybe it was they lost coverage or something. I don't know. Anyway, I'm surprised she said that. To be perfectly honest,
that's pretty weird.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm sure she's just in shock. And, it was NBC News that quoted it. So,
right.
You get hassled by a bunch of reporters right after your husband gets killed. And it's all over the news. I'm sure that's a very crazy experience. But anyway, the reason that I brought that up, though, is because, next week we're going to read this book by Paul Starr, The Social Transformation of American Medicine, which basically details how we became... how medicine became an established and sort of corporatized thing, and how it was paid for and stuff. And anyway, but we're reading Rousseau this week.
Yeah.
But I'm excited. I'm very excited. It seems like a really good book.
Nice.
I'm already ready to recommend it to every doctor I know.
Well, I hope it's not bad then.
Yeah, I mean, I've only read a little bit of it, but so far it's
Best
very good.
book you've read so far.
Yeah, basically. So you're tired though. You've been working sound, like a bunch of sound gigs, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then playing, obviously, still.
Yep.
Man.
Yeah. Yesterday I had sound gig, and then I was teaching a class, and then sound gig.
God, is it all at the same place at?
Most of it's at Mozart's, but I'm playing other places too. Tomorrow I'm playing in College Station.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. I need to go there. So I have an uncle there.
Oh, nice.
I need to go there one of these days.
Yep. But Rousseau. So this is pretty interesting. Although I didn't really understand the end.
Oh, really?
I read it. I read it a couple times, and I was like, I do not get what he's saying.
The very end, because I actually started
8 and 9.
I started the very end saying this is the root of it all. Like people think Marx is the root. I mean, it's Rousseau, really. I mean, and then probably you could say, what's his face? You know what's his face?
Yeah.
With the V. Why am I blanking on his name? It's late. By the way, it's 11:30.
It's late with a V.
If we're a little slower tonight, he's on the frickin' French Parliament or something.
Like Voltaire?
Voltaire, thank you.
Oh, okay. Yes. He's not before Rousseau.
Well, he was kind of a contemporary, but I think he was a little bit older.
Is he?
I thought he was, but I could be wrong. You're right, though. He was 18th century. Now we have to look this up. Quick, who can Google faster?
No, I'm not even doing it.
Oh, you're not?
No.
Voltaire High. That was the first thing that came up. Yeah, he was a little bit older. Remember, I'm the autistic date man.
Nice. Well, that's fine.
Don't you ever forget that.
Okay.
You could be the autistic everything else.
I'm kind of in this mode where I long for the days when you didn't know something and then you had to live with that.
Yeah.
You couldn't Google it, and so you say, "Oh, who was that actor in that movie?" And no one in your group remembers, and then you're just stuck with that.
That's true. That's true.
I kind of like that.
Those were the days.
You could also just make shit up.
Yeah.
It's so easy just to lie about information.
Well, yeah, I mean, Rockefeller's dad was a drifter conman because you used to be able to just drift from town to town and just start a new life.
Right.
It does kind of sound nice. You can't really escape anywhere anymore. Anyway, That's getting back to last episode with existentialist or transcendentalists
right.
and Walden and escaping. But yeah, no, I was actually very curious to know what you would think about this, because I do look at Rousseau as kind of the root of liberalism,
right?
Or a root, but whenever you say somebody's gonna get mad. But let them get mad, Antushka.
Yeah,
let them hate us. But because of that, I was wondering what you would think, because he also has like a lot of actually interesting kind of libertarian things in here, kings aren't gods,
right?
Right. He starts off in book 1 by just kind of talking about the origin of government and saying how, like, in the first society, the rulers were the gods. Emperor Caligula,
right. Yes.
And then, and also just saying how governments weren't always designed for the benefit of the people. There's plenty of examples of that, and how we're sort of trying to progress in civil society towards something that is basically the opposite of that, and more, empowering the individual. So that's the big thing that I got from here, is that he kind of talks about the state of nature, right? And then he talks about, I guess, the state of society, and and he, as he says, man, gives up unlimited freedom in that they have in the state of nature, but and they lose, I guess, that, because obviously when you take part in society, you have to give up some independence, but what you end up gaining is actually greater.
Right.
And that's kind of, I would say, his big thesis for book 1, and probably the whole book.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
Yeah. And so he just, it's called the social contract, and so he defines it. Believe it or not, Antushka, you love definitions.
Yes. I do. I think he generally does a good job of defining things, too.
Yeah. So I guess he calls it the social pact at this point, which I guess maybe that's different. Why would you do that, actually? Yeah, I guess maybe it is different.
Yeah.
But he calls the social pact, if then we eliminate from the social pact everything that is not essential to it, we find it comes down to this. Each one of us puts into the community his person and all his powers under the supreme direction of the general will. And as a body, we incorporate every member as an individualistic or indivisible part of the whole. Indivisible, with liberty and justice to all.
Right. Nice. Yeah. I think my translation calls it compact instead of pact.
Yeah, I was just actually thinking maybe it's it's just the title social contract is more popular, so the editor used that, but they decided to translate it differently in the text, which I think is silly. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't go and check the French on this one.
Jesus.
Would have been good to do, but I read it on a plane, so
what were you,
limited?
Busy and stuff. I read this on a plane too.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
You just flew back yesterday?
Yeah, I got back yesterday.
Man.
And then right to work as soon as I landed.
Good.
It was good.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I feel like he builds his argument in a nice way. It's easy, it's relatively easy to follow, kind of like Hoppe did. He starts with some basic principles.
Yeah.
Tackling the issue of force and slavery, I think, are good starting points.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that, I guess, how would you? I'm sorry,
What?
I'm trying to get focused here.
I think you were doing a good job. I think bringing up the fact that he was talking about force, because you're right. He was also bringing up this other dichotomy of the right of the strongest, and versus kind of the right of, I guess, morality,
right?
or justice.
And what you end up with if force is your ethic for what makes something right versus what you end up with, I guess with morality. I think that I run into the problem that I think a lot of people on the more religious side say that anybody arguing for liberal humanism and morality has a problem when they try and derive it rationally. And I think that Rousseau has similar problems, but I'm trying to sort of state, I think that he's right Rousseau is right when he brings up what will happen if you set force to be the determining factor of right and wrong. And I think that he's not the only one we've read. Did Nietzsche talk about that too?
Well, Nietzsche talked about that, yes. I mean, but...
Like, what happens when you use force to determine rightness and wrongness?
Yeah.
Maybe Hoppe did too?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Nietzsche did. I can't think of the exact sort of...
It just feels reminiscent of something else we read,
I mean,
and I can't put my finger on it.
Obviously, that was the case of like I cut you off a little bit there. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
That was obviously the case of I guess you could say what did he call it? The ancient morality, that the Romans kind of embodied. Mm-hmm. See, now I'm blanking.
Yeah. Anyway,
well,
so he talks about what happens when you have a system based on force, and he's got a little quote. I like this. I highlighted it and put a smiley face next to it because I thought it was a good turn of phrase. Mm-hmm. He said, "He who believes himself the master of others fails not to be a greater slave than they." And it's interesting, and I don't remember what it was. I know we've talked about it on the podcast before, but I don't think we read it. I think I just mentioned it. The idea that the slave master is as much of a slave as the slave themselves.
Maybe that was Locke.
Could have been.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So you agree with that.
And so then going into some other ideas like Rose Wilder Lane and stuff even, mm-hmm. the idea that actually not only is... the use of force sort of a form of enslavement. Enslavement is wrong. Also, enslavement is kind of an impossible scenario.
Right.
Like, it is wrong to attempt to enslave somebody else.
It is
Locke. Also impossible for one to sell themselves into slavery.
That was Locke, because I remember we got into that, and I didn't want to go down that route.
Nice. Well, it's back a little bit.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's okay.
And then he talks about the family, and I thought this was an interesting paragraph. He says, "The family, therefore, if you will, the first model of political society. The leader is the image of the father. The people is the image of the children." So I think that's an interesting way of setting about sort of the prehistory of political society. It's another thing that Hoppe does. It's another thing that Marx does. That this idea of sort of drawing on the ancient past. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a proverbial societal history or something like that.
But I mean that makes sense. I mean that's just empiricism, using the past to.
Right, but he's talking about the beginning. He's not talking about something we can observe.
Well, we observe it in the writings that are left, Like
my guess is he's talking about before writing, even.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, maybe.
The family as the first model of political society.
Yeah. Yes, that, and he's definitely not the only one to talk about that.
No, I mean, Hoppe has a book called A Brief History of Humanity, where he goes all the way like 60,000 years in the past or something like that. Anyway, so the father is the image of the leader, and the people is the image of the children. And since all are born equal and free, they alienate their freedom only for the sake of their utility. The entire difference is that in the family, the father's love for his children rewards him for the care he provides them, whereas in the state, the pleasure of commanding takes the place of love, which the leader does not have for his people.
I think it was also Locke again, too. I mean, obviously Rousseau would have read probably Locke's 2 treatises on government. Right. This sounds a lot like that, because he does that whole part about the father and the mother being, I think, the basic, like, government as well. I think he takes that exact perspective. And Locke Locke is still influential, but he was like a megastar, I'm pretty sure, in the 18th century. Right. You know?
Yeah.
With that flowing hair, those flowing locks of hair.
Right.
He actually did. He and Newton, like, ran.
Yeah, good hair.
They had great hair.
Unless it was wigs.
No, I don't think it was. I mean, it could have been. Who knows? They could have been bald, and that's the great thing back then. You could be bald, and you just be like, "Hey, paint some hair on me."
Yeah.
Make me look great.
Yeah.
Yes. No. So. So what do you think about that?
I guess I think it makes sense. I mean, I don't know about this whole prehistory thing.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like the arguments I get into on Reddit where people say war has existed as long as humanity has existed, or whatever, or for all of time there have been tyrants or something like that.
Right.
I think it's a useful metaphorical illustration of an idea. I don't think it has a whole lot of factual strength. I can say, like, as a conception, the family is prior to the political society or something, and I can get that, and I can follow it through. It's more the assertion that is the way things have always been, or like that the family is the precursor to political society. Because the other thing is there's all sorts of arguments about the history of families and what families have been. And, there's like, this seems to be at least implying something like a nuclear family.
Yes, I would agree with that. And it's true. I mean, there's obviously lots of different types of family structure.
I don't know. I mean, like, I don't even know how old the nuclear family is an idea. It's probably extremely old.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, these are good questions. I understand your skepticism. I mean, it's just hard to make claims about, like you said, something that we can't actually preserve or have any records of. But I think, you can be certain that at least as long as humans have been have diverged, or rather as long as it has required a man and a woman to make a child,
that's fun.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to liven up the podcast a little bit.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, we're really just swaying over into uncharted territory right now. But no, I mean, so there's obviously 2 authority figures to every human by default of how we're made. Is kind of what my point is. Whether you want to call that a nuclear family or whether it needs to be, you need to have both of them in your life or whatever. I'm not even trying to have that debate. I'm just saying from a factual standpoint, every human has 2 authority figures that had to come, and authority figures meaning because they were the things that bequeathed them.
Right.
And we seem to associate authority with that by default. I
think that the way he goes on, though, is more or less correct, and this is what I was saying about as a conceptual framework. I think it makes sense and it's easy to follow. And this is where stuff like this, I don't know if I think I'm being too picky or too pedantic about it. I think it's one of those things where it doesn't really even matter if 60,000 years ago that's how things were going or not.
It matters.
It matters. Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, but I get your general point because, I mean, a lot of people do this. I mean, Marx, like literally almost probably half of the people that we've read have used some kind of, have said like, this should happen because this is obviously like the natural way.
That's where I start to get a little bit concerned, is the using naturalism or using ancient history as some kind of authority,
which
over
Hoppe
how we
does.
should or shouldn't do. Right, they all do it. Yeah, absolutely.
And Marx does in a sense. But I mean, it's understandable because it's, our biologies have evolved to be beneficial under certain circumstances. So trying to emulate those circumstances will make us, fulfill ourselves most whatever well.
Yeah, maybe. Yes.
Well, I mean, if okay.
The next point he makes is one that I like a lot, though, because I feel like it's a common. He's criticizing a way of approaching something that I feel like is happening all the time. He goes on. He's talking about Aristotle. He says Aristotle had also said that men are not naturally equal, but that some are born for slavery and others for domination.
Yeah.
So there's the first.
Yeah, I remember.
There's the first part of that statement that we've even talked about.
Yes.
That seems, at least depending on what you mean, somewhat uncontroversial. The second part is not very favorable, according to today's morality. But then the next part he says, Aristotle was right. Nice. But he mistook the effect for the cause. And I love that. I think that's a great encapsulation of what the problem of Aristotle's previous statement there is. Rousseau goes on, every man born in slavery is born for slavery. Nothing is more certain. Slaves lose everything in their chains, even the desire to leave them. That's another important point. They love their servitude just as Ulysses' companions loved their brutishness. If they are slaves by nature, then it is because there have been slaves contrary to nature. Force made the first slaves. Their cowardice perpetuated them. That is quite a statement. I feel like that in this opening is the most probing and challenging bit.
Yes, no, it's the bit that I keep avoiding. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're like what bit? I haven't heard any. What?
And you keep just dragging us back.
Yeah, right. I think Kanye West got in trouble for saying something similar. Actually,
yes, he did.
Who knew?
He very much did.
But if we push aside the super challenging part of it, I think the first bit about the mistaking the cause for the effect is the reason I highlighted that is it's a problem that I see all over the place. About you see a situation that is true. There are people who are unequal. And then you come up with some very strange conclusion that there are people who are born to be this way and they're born to be that way.
Right. Because it's essentially put in another way, mistaking nature and nurture,
Sure.
Because you're saying just because they were nurtured this way, thus it becomes it's their genetics.
Right.
Yeah. But it's also tricky because, we know this with just animals. If you breed animals for certain things, you're going to start to select for people that are going to be good at certain things. And that's especially dicey too. Because we humans don't like to think of ourselves as animals, and we don't like to think of ourselves as conditionable and selectable. And because eugenics, right? This is essentially what that is.
Right.
Except we do eugenics on every other animal all the time.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, that's, I think, the other very complicated aspect, though, is that it just gets back to the controversial point of nature versus nurture. I feel like all of these controversial points come down to that. Just like the idea of like being born this way. That's essentially a nature versus nurture question.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, I'm going to bring it to the consciousness because I think the reason we push back on it is because consciousness wants to have control. And if you're saying something is nature, it means that you can't change it.
Right.
And a conscious individual is going to battle against that any means.
Right.
Which is why, yes.
Is Rousseau battling against it?
Yeah, I think really what it is that any conscious individual is going to battle against slavery.
Right.
But you can beat consciousness out of humans, I think.
Yeah, of course. But that's what he's saying. You can get people to want to be slaves.
Well, I guess I wouldn't even say it's want to be, but it's that if you beat people into a state where they're not reflecting upon their state.
Right.
It's not even doesn't become a thing. It no longer exists, I guess is what I would say. Sure.
But yeah, that's true. I mean, he's talking about people longing for their own slavery.
Yes, but I think it's a non-reflective longing because it's routine and habit. You know,
there were after the abolition of slavery in the United States, there were like groups of
it's routine
slaves that
and
became
habit.
Political lobbyists to try and reinstate their own slavery.
Yes,
I mean that's like this is again like they're using like an extreme form of consciousness to try and, I guess, from your perspective, dilute consciousness or something like that.
Yeah, but we don't know that they were. I mean, they could have been pawns, too. You know. Yeah, I guess what my point is, how much reflection is going on, and I think the more reflection you have, the less you would have any individual do something like that, advocating for their own enslavement.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, I think that's probably true.
By them doing that, I think they're not very aware.
Right.
That's, I guess, what I would say.
But they are hyper aware, because this is like what he's talking about with the children and the parents thing. Children are aware, especially at young ages, how much they need their parents. And you know, when they're too young, they're not aware of that, and they're just acting on instinct.
Yes.
But like a 5-year-old is terrified of the idea of losing their parents.
But think about it from an addiction standpoint. It's like I don't think it's hyper. So I'm addressing your fact that you think it's a hyper awareness. I think it's a lesser awareness, and just because it takes a hyper awareness to break an addiction. An addiction is difficult because you don't want to break it because it's a routine. It's a dopamine fix. It is the comfort. It's this, and it's instinctual because it's been habitualized into you. I'm a behavioralist. This is a behavioralist perspective, right? You become so used to something that you don't even necessarily understand why you want it, but you know that you want it, and so yes, you'll rationalize ways.
But a 5-year-old, at least many 5-year-olds, do know why their parents are important. Because their parents take care of them.
My point is a hyper-conscious individual can identify if something is good or bad for them and break it if they need to, like an addiction.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a conscious individual to break up, to realize that even though it feels good, I shouldn't be doing this.
Right. Can you keep going? Can you relate that to what I'm saying about a kid?
I don't understand how the kid. I don't understand how the kid relates. Actually, can you relate it to this better?
So I'm saying that a child is essentially a slave, and that a child will argue consciously for its own slavery because it believes or it knows that state is extremely important to its own survival.
Mm-hmm.
Because a 5-year-old is not yet capable of taking care of itself completely. However, a 5-year-old is pretty conscious.
But it's not relative to us. So that's how I would say it relates.
What do you mean
it's
relative to us?
We are, I would say, more self-aware than a 5-year-old.
More, yeah, but I would say a 5-year-old is highly. A 5-year-old is more self-aware than any animal on the planet.
Yes, but
a 5-year-old is like very close to an.
But
adult.
there's levels. You're missing the level aspect. I'm not saying that they're not, but I'm just saying you're using this term hyper-aware. Am
I saying hyper-aware?
You said that.
Let's skip. Forget hyper-aware. Don't worry about the word hyper-aware. It doesn't matter. I'm saying that a 5-year-old is conscious of the fact that it needs to be taken care of, and so it will argue for its own to have masters take care of it.
Yes, but I'm saying that it's not so aware that a truly aware 5-year-old would not do that, is my point. And even more aware, self-aware 5-year-old.
But a truly aware 5-year-old is aware of its own limitations. I mean, this is the same thing as an adult. There are people who argue, like this happens with the elderly, that, argue for Social Security, argue for Medicare, things like that. These are things that directly advantage them, that they believe are necessary for their own thriving. And so they will argue for maintaining these systems even at the expense of their own freedom.
I guess my point is that a hyper, and I'm using hyper here because I'm just saying even more aware than the example toddler you used. I'm
a 5-year-old, not a toddler.
Or whatever.
That's why I said a 5-year-old.
Okay, another 5-year-old.
Yeah.
So we're introducing an even more aware 5-year-old.
Uh-huh.
I think that they would basically not argue for their enslavement. They would say that they are aware enough and capable enough that they don't need their parents and that they should be emancipated.
Right, but they're
because they're
small.
aware enough so that they could do all the things that an adult could do. If we're saying that they are so aware that they have the awareness of an adult, then they don't need to be.
I'm saying that they have the awareness of their own limitation, not that they have the same awareness as an adult.
Yes, but how do we bridge this?
I don't know. I'm saying I agree with Rousseau, and I think this is what he's saying.
This is why we need Brother X, because he would be able to figure out where we're miscommunicating. Because I feel like I've said it a million times, and I don't want to say it again. I'm talking about levels. You said, what's your question? Your question is, how can a 5-year-old not be? I'm not saying the 5-year-old isn't aware.
I don't have a question. I'm making a statement.
But what you're talking about is rationalization, which is fine. I'm not saying that a person can't have some level of awareness to rationalize why they should be doing something. Right. But I'm just saying that a even more hyper-aware individual, as you go on the scale of more and more conscious, I guess, you want less and less enslavement, is I guess the point I'm making. Right. So an even more conscious 5-year-old would not do that, is all my point is.
Sure.
They would be capable enough of doing math and all this stuff that requires consciousness.
So I would say, okay, fine. I would say Marx is a highly conscious individual who is arguing directly for slavery. Judith Butler is another example.
Yeah, but this is where it's tricky.
Like, these are very conscious people.
Yes, but I think that they're arguing for a lowered consciousness for
other people. Maybe.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Especially with Marx. But yes. Yeah, arguing for the enslavement of others.
Yes.
But actually arguing for the enslavement of everybody.
Yes. But there's always, this is why it's like communism by default makes an oligarchy,
Right. Well, doesn't everything?
Well, you're right.
According to
it's a good point. Yeah, the iron law of oligarchy. Yeah. It's a great point. But I just mean
I was being sort of flippant, but yeah.
No, but I guess some things get there faster. How about that?
Right.
And have less and are in some ways you have to have it because as is evidenced by the Soviet Union, it's like it ends up being controlled by a small group of people who have to keep, and not just the Soviet Union, Mao, China too.
Right.
Like Mao had to be extremely surveillant of everybody to maintain the centralized control that he did in order to make it so that everybody was doing what they had to do. You had to keep tabs on everybody. So anyway, you're saying that Rousseau is arguing against that, right? He's saying that people are born free, right, and stuff like that. That's all you're trying to say here.
Yes, and that people can be conditioned to argue for their own enslavement.
Yes, I agree with that.
Right. Yeah, I assumed that we agreed the whole time. It's the consciousness thing. I get confused when you say like arguing for or against consciousness, because it's also like we're in a weird spot where like arguing is a conscious thing to do. And so the idea of arguing against consciousness is a very confusing act.
Yeah, that's why I think it's important, I think, to, at least for me, the way that I'm thinking about it is as a level thing. It's like there's just levels to it. And I'm not saying,
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Wait, you're not saying what?
I'm not even saying it's necessarily good to be hyperconscious too.
Right.
Sometimes, right? Because again, it brings awareness of death and stuff.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like Nietzsche was sort of in the middle about it, right?
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's a long side track for the proto political world. And then he talks about the right of the stronger, which is interesting because that then reminds me of Plato.
Ask you about that. Yeah, and I mean that's I think central to his major point, and maybe the point that you're confused about at the end. But yeah, because he brings it back at the end, talking about the right about property essentially. Oh yeah, he had some interesting thing. He had natural versus civil liberty, and then possession versus property.
Right.
And then this led into the right of the first occupant versus the right of the strongest.
Right.
And I thought those were all three very important things that then led up to his conclusion, which we'll get to eventually. That'll be a little teaser. But yes, so natural versus civil liberty. Yeah. What man loses by the social contract is his natural liberty and the absolute right to anything that tempts him and that he can take. What he gains by the social contract is civil liberty and the legal right of property in what he possesses. And so he goes on to define property versus possession as if we are to avoid mistakes in weighing the one side against the other, we must clearly distinguish between natural liberty, which has no limit but the physical power of the individual concerned, and civil liberty, which is limited by the general will. And we must distinguish also between possession, which is based only on force or the right of the first occupant. So the right of the first occupant is possession.
Right.
And property, which must rest on a legal title. And so he then goes on to talk about how the right of the first occupant, although more real than the right of the strongest, does not become a true right until the institution of property. Every man has a natural right to what he needs, but the positive act which makes a man the proprietor of any estate excludes him from everything else. I thought that was kind of an interesting point. His share having once been settled, he must confine himself to it, and he has no further right against the community. Thus we see how the right of the first occupant, weak as it is in the state of nature, compels in political society the respect of all men. What this right makes one aware of is less what belongs to others than what does not belong to oneself.
Right.
So once you claim something, you have also excluded yourself from a bunch of things.
Right.
And yeah, I just thought that was an interesting point that I wondered what you thought about. So, the right of the strongest in the state of nature is what rules. And
I think that this is where I started to lose him.
I figured.
I don't think what he's saying is crazy. I think that this is where I start to have a problem with everybody. Property rights are the most confusing thing to me, and I do not have a good grasp on them. I feel like Locke is close, but it still feels a little bit like you're just making something up at a certain point. And the same thing here. I think that when he's talking
with Locke a little bit about, he
right.
also says you have to toil something in order.
I think Locke does a slightly better job. However, Locke is also writing something more complete. So to me, this is kind of a short glimpse into it, and I imagine Rousseau could flesh it out more. But I think that when he's talking about property as something sort of socially ratified, like you have the right to something, you have the deed to something, you socially recognized property. I think that is still under the rubric of force, just not individual force. I mean, I think all force boils down to individual force, but I think like the state is what ratifies property that he's talking about under the guise of the social contract. And I think that the reason the state can do that is because the state has force on its side.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. And then even from the libertarian standpoint, it's always what lies at the defense of it is the non-aggression principle that, if somebody screws with your property or you,
right,
then you're allowed to aggress. Yes, I think I would agree with that at base. I feel like his rebuttal might be something like his point essentially is that it's an aggregate of society that's generating the force versus just an individual,
right?
Like boorish individual,
Right. I think that this is the issue that I have with most liberal philosophy is that to me it's obfuscating things. It's saying things are bad and things are good. And then it's allowing for those bad things as long as you don't see them clearly.
Yes.
So we can do all the same stuff that we say is bad as long as it's sort of obfuscated and dispersed. And I don't think that that's crazy necessarily because, the issue of property is a complicated one. And how do we determine what property is legitimate and what property isn't, and how do we enforce that? I don't know. This is where, when I read Hoppe and the full anarcho-capitalist view of things where, even justice systems are private. And so you hire a private adjudicator to, decide some dispute. I don't know. That feels a little crazy to me too. But it feels like Rousseau in this case is ignoring the fact that it is still at its root force. And so I agree with him when he sets out the problem with force as a system of morality is that it is very unlikely that you will always win this because there's always going to be somebody stronger than you. Like, force is a tenuous system of morality. However, I think not as a system of morality, but as a system of...
Yeah, because I would say he would probably say it's not a system of morality.
Right. But I think that there's no escaping it in some places.
Yeah. I get your point. I wonder now, as you were saying that, it was making me think potentially it's more of a degree you're separated from force.
Right. Sure.
Because obviously in the state of nature, the force is right on you. Somebody just comes and pushes you off of your property with a gun or whatever, or a club.
Yep. Sure.
And
why not both?
Why not both? And there's my Midwestern accent.
Yeah.
And then in civil society, the pretense is that you can't do that. A functioning government, as Rousseau, I think, would think, one that is actually working for the people, is not going to be using force arbitrarily. It would only use force if somebody uses force and transgresses against you. It would come in as defense. It wouldn't be an attack. You know, it's a defensive move, which means it's a degree separated, or it's a degree further.
I get it, because I'm not able to battle off all these people. I understand. But once again, we're in the situation of arguing for our own slavery.
Well, and you know, you can use the word slavery. I doubt he would. Maybe he would.
No, I don't think he would, because he's talking about the social contract. And so this is the thing, is obfuscating it.
Well, yes, and I mean, it's a very interesting question. Yes, I see what you're saying. Because he is saying that he very clearly says you're giving up rights, right? As soon as you form a social compact, that's the whole idea. But I guess why he would say maybe it's not slavery is because as opposed to slaves, if you are a functioning individual that's done a voluntary social compact, you are actually gaining more than if you were a fully free individual in the state of nature.
Right.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah.
It's
So where do you but you disagree, obviously.
Yeah.
And why?
I disagree somewhat. I understand the practicality of it.
Yeah, because it's also getting at semantics a little bit of like, well, what's Rousseau's definition of slavery? What's yours?
Right. No. But what I'm saying is I understand the practicality of what he's saying, and I think that, you know, like a social contract, in quotes, I'm not sure I fully believe in it, but the idea of a cooperating society is extremely useful. I like it. I'm for cooperation. I think that if we don't use the word slavery, we use like trading freedom for security. And I would say that slavery is, you know, at the very minimum, the far end of that. Like, full freedom for full security. And even
would you say slavery security?
Yes, because he even uses the example of. I'll explain why. Hang on a second. I don't mean that it's a nice life. I don't mean it's cushy.
Yes.
What I mean is that he uses the example of, armies conquering and, either killing or taking as slaves. And he talks about how that's a false choice, and I get that. I agree with him. But it's the security versus freedom. They are trading freedom, the freedom to battle, to fight, to engage in the state of nature, in the state of war or battle, for security.
For not being beaten
killed.
Or whatever. Yeah. Killed.
Like literally freedom for security in the most brutal sense.
Right. I see.
And so that's why I would call slavery the extreme form of trading freedom for security. And then there's all these sort of moderate forms that we have, like, TSA at the airport or something like that. Which I would say isn't necessarily a form of slavery, but is some kind of like bizarre tyranny that we all go through.
Well, I guess that's maybe the point, is that potentially slavery should only be preserved, the word, for the position where somebody has to do something or else they'll be killed. Like that's their
right. And so then actually there are fewer forms of slavery around the world historically than we even think. Because most systems of slavery involved like jailing and things like that for escaped slaves. Some involved killing.
Well, I think the idea is the threat of death is always looming at the end, whether or not it actually ever comes to that. The threat of death is always there.
Right. And then if we think about our modern world with things like even like a parking ticket or taxation, at the end of all of those things there is a threat of death, because once you've been told to do something by the state and you say no, all bets are off, essentially. You do not actually have the right to...
I don't know, man.
You don't know? What happens if you resist arrest?
Well, if you resist a parking ticket, though, I mean, look, there's obviously levels, but that's the point.
Hang on. What happens if you resist arrest? You might die, right?
You could, yes.
That's not crazy.
No, but you used a parking ticket.
Hang on. If you don't pay a parking ticket, eventually you'll be arrested.
Yes.
And then if you resist arrest, you may or may not die, depending on what they do, because you do not have the right to say no to the state. And by you don't have the right, that means that your body, like you literally are forced at the threat of death, or, on the other side, at the threat of imprisonment. And what did we read? It was Assange, Julian Assange. The idea of what does it mean to be free? Freedom of movement, freedom of travel is an integral part of freedom.
You're getting me back. Although, again, I think it's still just degrees.
I'm not saying that anybody's really being killed over parking tickets. I'm talking about the full implication of
Yes, which is what I had said, is that so it's a good rebuttal to the point that I had made of death looming in the distance as a possibility. Right. But you could say that with everything, I suppose. So maybe that's why that isn't a good definition of slavery.
Right.
After all,
I don't know.
We just Socratized that.
Well, I think it doesn't matter what the definition of slavery is. I say whatever that thing is, where I'm not particularly in favor of situations where you are at great bodily risk for not obeying systems of authority. And it seems to me like Rousseau is arguing against that at the top, and then finds his way at least halfway back there by the end.
I agree, and I think that's a good point. You weren't expecting that, were you?
No, I was not. But to be fair to Rousseau and the entire liberal movement, it's not like I don't benefit from this also. It's not like I'm not like some huge fighter guy.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're not. No, you're not by any means.
Right.
I would say.
Okay, all right, relax.
No, you are actually. You're a complete I just start cussing you out. I'll just add bleeps just to make it sound like I did. No, I mean, I get what you're saying, actually. I think it actually makes sense. But I think it is, I guess maybe my big take home is that this is why it's important to have degrees of liberty diminishment. Right. Because not every diminishment of liberty is equal. Right. And I think his point that there is some sort of aggregated good that comes to the individual that makes the social contract versus the one that just stays in the state of nature, right? Or else we wouldn't have developed it. I mean, and whether that good is just the fact that it makes us able to conquer the nature and survive better, then so be it. I don't think it diminishes the fact that, I guess, its existence justifies itself as better, I suppose.
Yeah. I think it is possible to develop systems that end up being counterproductive and lose over time.
Yes, certainly.
To to me, like the Maoist system is one that even if it takes over for 100 years, there's no way that's going to work long term.
I'm talking about the meta. Yes, I agree. I guess, and I'm not saying you're even disagreeing. I'm just saying what I was talking about was the more general idea of just society.
Right. Yeah. Civilization is helpful.
Yeah, civilization. And yes, exactly. Which is something we've discussed before.
Yeah, I agree.
Obviously.
And this is where I'm very pro cooperation, and I love the idea of it being voluntary, but that could be too rosy, and maybe you do need an authoritarian hand. And the problem is always, if you're talking about levels of diminishment of freedom, once you start doing that, how do you mitigate it going too far?
Well, and I was just thinking how we've just kind of agreed that we at least seem to agree that civilization should probably exist. It seems to be the benefit to at least humanity.
Right.
But it also, I would say, selects for humans that are more conscious. And I've already talked about how I think conscious individuals fight against enslavement more so than less conscious individuals. So I wonder if it's just inevitable that you're going to always have a weird battle in it. Because versus the state of nature, whereas I think you're basically an animal in the state of nature. I think humans were probably animal. That's where we came from, as less aware animals. And then,
not according to the Bible, but
sure,
fine,
fair enough.
Whatever.
You're right. This is the gospel of Antushka and Mr. X.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Is that the title?
I've never thought about it in those terms until just now when you were saying that we came from the state of nature. But it is pretty radical, the idea that the Bible has us start with, we do come in the state of nature in the Bible anyway. There's the Garden of Eden, and they eat from the knowledge of good and evil. They gain consciousness, and then they fall from grace. All right, never mind. Yeah.
Exactly. We were animals, and then we became aware, and we're like, shit, we got to put some pants on.
Ruh-roh. We got to put some pants. That's funny.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I've always interpreted it.
Yeah. The pants thing.
Well, it's just, animals don't care if you're naked. You're not aware of it.
Yeah. It is funny that we care.
Well, because I think, again, consciousness, I mean, if you want to go down this route, but I have a very good answer, I think, for this. Consciousness is going to, civilization selecting for more conscious individuals, and it's doing this by testing people to mitigate their animal instincts. So the people that can control their animal instincts better will do better in society.
Right.
And for men especially, that area is one thing that is very difficult for us to control.
Animal instincts.
Yes. You can tell if somebody's excited, right? And so I'm being very serious. I think that this is, in some ways, it kind of is it makes sense to conceal it if you're trying to conceal your animal desires.
That is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense what you're saying.
Thank you. We've just gone all over the place.
Yeah. It gives me so many thoughts about, like, quote, civilized society and all that. Huh.
Well, yeah. But everything I think in society is just it's a consciousness test. All the rules are tests.
So what about all the stuff what about the movements of, like music with more sexual dancing and fewer clothes and all that. Like, I would say that over the last 100 years, pop culture has developed and moved in a way of accentuating all of those things that you were saying are you might want to hide away if you are trying to avoid the animal.
And what does everybody also say? That civilization's decaying.
Right. Nice. See, that's another one. That's a risky area to go down.
What?
What that the idea of civilization decaying and a sign of it is more animalistic pop culture.
Yeah, but I mean that's what they say with the Romans and Nero, and
right.
stuff. And yeah, I mean, but
so we should go back to wearing like 5-piece suits and wigs and stuff.
Well, I mean, but I was also going to say, don't get me wrong, people were getting freaky in the 19th and 18th century.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Marquis de Sade wrote a whole thing about it.
I feel like the freakiness is there one way or the other. It's how much are you hiding it?
Well, and then I was just about to say France was probably the hyper decadent society of the time, too.
Right.
I mean, it was pre-revolutionary France.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right before they kind of collapsed on themselves.
Right.
But I guess then they bounced back.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was a decent conversation. We got a little bit sidetracked on the consciousness stuff. I'll see if I need to cut anything out to make it a little bit.
Well, is there anything else you want to hit?
Think so.
I feel like it's number 7. I have a huge question mark. I feel like I didn't understand it in a literal way.
Oh, the sovereign. Yeah. I didn't really understand that either.
Because he makes a point about the specific language. But yeah, the sovereign, I didn't really understand the idea of the sovereign when he defined it earlier, too.
It's just, I mean...
the state in action or something like that?
Well, he says, now as the sovereign is formed entirely of individuals who compose it. That's how I understand it.
Right.
And that's why it has not, nor could it have any interest contrary to theirs. So it's just getting back at that thing that he was talking about of as soon as individuals take part in the social contract, they form this sovereign and they form an indivisible part of it.
Right.
That sounds like an oxymoron, though.
Yeah, I don't know.
Are we falling asleep here?
Yeah, maybe. No, I have like so many. I think I have 3 question marks on this section. I think it's just like I read it a couple times and it's like I'm not getting what he's saying here. Like if you asked me to sum it up, I'd have a hard time.
Yeah, I don't know how I would sum it up. However, since the body politic, their sovereign owes its being to the sanctity of the contract alone, it cannot commit itself, even in treaties with foreign powers, to anything that would derogate from the original act of association. I think he's just defining the parameters of the sovereign, which is, again, that aggregate of individuals. It's society, basically.
Right.
It's the will of the people.
Right.
That amorphous.
Yeah,
thing.
The will of the people. Right, I remember that. Yep.
So, I mean, yeah, we could quibble all over the place with this of like, does this even exist, right? Is there actually one uniform will, as he's sort of painting it here?
Yeah.
I would say that's the one big thing you could start to poke around at it with.
Yeah.
With that anarchic prodder of yours.
Anarchic prodder? Like a
prober. You're
yeah, it is a prober. That's right.
Yeah. Do you want me to read this?
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is at the end. I have root of it all.
Nice.
Star.
Oh, nice.
Are
2
you
of
ready?
them.
Yeah.
Lucky dude. Got 2
I know.
stars.
I shall end this chapter in Book 1 with an observation which might serve as the basis for the whole social system, namely, Antushka.
Yeah, right.
That the social pact, far from destroying natural equality, substitutes, on the contrary, a moral and lawful equality for whatever physical inequality that nature may have imposed on mankind, so that however unequal in strength and intelligence, men become equal by covenant and by right.
Yep.
There you go.
So he's the first DEI guy.
Exactly.
I have social equity written under that.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, he's like a social worker.
Yeah. So, Rousseau, you won. I mean, you basically, this is what happened.
Yeah. This social contract is constantly being used to right all the wrongs of nature.
Yes, exactly. Yep. Exactly.
What a funny idea.
Well, and then I can, again, I haven't but can we just appreciate how I haven't really brought up consciousness that much, like in the last 3-4 months?
Oh, but today,
yes. So
it's back.
I'm indulging.
Consciousness
is my point.
Like,
yes.
Yeah, the return of.
Yes, and I would say again, if this is the case, it's as you said, it's fighting nature.
Nice.
And that's because that's what consciousness does.
I see. Yes. Nice. Okay, I get it.
Finally.
I'm not going to get it next time, but for now, I get it.
Yeah, it's good.
It's fine. It was pretty. I thought you were about to pat yourself on the back for not bringing up consciousness in this episode. And I was like, well, hang on a second. No, but I agree. We haven't talked about it a lot in the last while.
Yeah.
I should pick a reading all about consciousness. Actually, I saw one the other day that I thought would be interesting about addiction.
Addiction or diction?
Addiction.
Yeah.
It's called something about the science of desire. It's somebody who talks about addiction, and it's like they don't conceptualize it as a disease. They conceptualize it as like a play of weak and strong desire or something like that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean habit. That's how I would say it. Yeah, which I agree. It's dopamine.
Right.
Dopamine,
man. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Well, good job, Rousseau. Yeah. Clap, as you said. Yeah. So what are we reading next week?
Oh, yeah. We're reading about the healthcare system and how it started. Although, I guess we haven't decided exact things. I just want to read the whole book, to be perfectly honest.
Nice. How long is it?
It's pretty long. I don't think we can... Okay. We should do it, but I will try to read it, the full thing. And we're going to have Brother X back on, right?
Is he going to be able to come on at midnight?
Are we doing it at midnight again? Probably not, no.
I have this schedule for the next 4 weeks.
Okay.
It's every day of my life.
Wow. Okay, yeah, he probably won't be able to do it. That's okay. Well, I'll talk to him about that.
I might. Okay, here's the other thing: is I might be able to do a daytime on a Monday or a Wednesday.
That's what you texted, right?
Did I? Yeah, I might.
I thought you texted something like that.
Because Zora's in daycare on Mondays and Wednesdays. But that's also tricky with people's work schedules.
Yeah. He probably couldn't do a day thing. I'll talk to him about it.
Okay.
Yeah, but this preface, just even the preface, I've divided this history into 2 books to emphasize 2 long movements in the development of American medicine. First, the rise of professional sovereignty. And second, the transformation of medicine into an industry and the growing, though still unsettled, role of corporations in the state. And then he says he explores a variety of questions. Why Americans who were wary of medical authority in the early and mid-19th century became devoted to it in the 20th. How American doctors who were bitterly divided and financially insecure in the 19th century became a united and prosperous profession in the 20th. So it's just interesting,
Wow.
It's like, It's exactly the questions I have. Why Blue Cross and commercial indemnity insurance rather than other types of health plans dominate the private insurance market, you know?
Yeah. This is going to be too depressing. I'm going to read this and be like, we're screwed.
Well, I think the hope here for me is that this will first give a good overview of what the issue is and how we got here. And then maybe at some other future point, we could read a little bit more about like how other societies have done this, like the billing of medical stuff.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
I don't even know the social origins of professional sovereignty. That's the first part. Medicine in a democratic culture, 1760 to 1850. That might be kind of interesting. The expansion of the market, the emerging market before the Civil War. Consolidation of professional authority, 1850 to 1930. Reconstitution of the hospital. I don't know. Is this interesting? Or is
it's very interesting.
Okay.
What's the title of the book?
Oh, yeah. It's called The Social Transformation of American Medicine by Paul Starr.
Nice.
Yeah, it's like 400 pages, so.
And then after that, we're going to read about how the flu is not airborne.
I thought we were going to read Blues People.
Yeah, we can read that too.
I bought it. Yeah, I did buy it. So.
Oh, cool. All right.
And
even though you hate the blues.
I do hate the blues. No, I don't hate the blues. I overdosed on them.
Yeah.
I grew up on the blues, like I said.
Nice. Oh, this book's old. It's from the 80s.
Yes, exactly. Which is another interesting thing because it's exactly, we'll see how much he predicted, but it seems like he's predicting everything, right? The corporatization of medicine.
Yeah.
That was just the beginning of it in the 80s. And, you still had mom and pop, so to speak, clinics, You could still open a clinic. And again, one thing he won't probably talk about is, I'll be curious, but the rise of electronic medical records, because I think that's another thing that has really killed the individual clinics that could be more independent than they are now. Is that you need a bunch of money to just set up a electronic medical record system, a computer system, Right. Anyway, do you want me to just look through it and then text you? I don't know.
Or that's fine.
We could just start with the beginning too.
Yeah, that's always good.
Yeah, let's just do that.
Okay.
I guess if you can read chapter 1.
Okay.